Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. The Bible tells one big story of redemption, and we want to spend 5 minutes every day journeying through the Bible from start to finish and exploring how all of it points to Jesus. Today, the story shifts focus to Jacob's 12 sons and specifically to Joseph. Joseph will be the focus for the rest of Genesis. So we find out that Jacob, like his father before him, plays favorites, and Joseph is definitely the favorite. Jacob made Joseph this extravagant coat made of all different colors, and not surprisingly, his brothers were jealous and they hated him for it. And to make matters worse, Jacob told them about these dreams he was having, that he was ruling over his brothers. So of course, they hated him even more. So Joseph's brothers want to kill him. But Reuben, the firstborn, intervenes. He tells them just to throw him in a pit, and Reuben secretly plans to go back and rescue him and bring him home later. So they take his colorful robe and throw him in a pit and sit down for lunch, and then a big group of Ishmaelites headed to Egypt pass through. And so Judah has the idea to sell Joseph so that they can gain a profit. And they sell him for 20 shekels of silver. So they kill a goat and dip Joseph's coat in blood so that their father would think that a wild animal devoured him. So Joseph ended up in the home of Potiphar, who was an officer of the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh of Egypt was like the king over Egypt. Now, Genesis 38 actually shifts briefly from the focus on Joseph to tell a story about Judah that was probably going on around the same time. So Judah marries a Canaanite woman, which she wasn't supposed to do in the first place, but she had 3 sons with Judah. The first son, married a woman named Tamar. Now, we don't know much about but we know that he was so wicked that God, the God of justice, actually put him to death. And this left Tamar in a very vulnerable place as a widow in this society. And in this time, it was the duty of the deceased man's brother to marry his widow and give her children to preserve his brother's name and build up his brother's house. This was called a Levirate marriage. And that brother was Onan. But Onan did not like the idea of having a child that had to have his brother's name because that meant that that child would inherit the land instead of Onan. So Onan would sleep with Tamar, but every time he would spill his semen on the ground so that she would not get pregnant. He cared only about his own pleasure and did not care for Tamar. He abused her, and God took Onan's life too. So now Tamar has been twice widowed, and Judah offered Tamar his other son, Shelah, whenever he was old enough to be married. But Judah had no intention of giving his son to marry Tamar. And so when Judah's wife died, Tamar decided to retaliate. She disguised herself as a prostitute and slept with Judah. Now, for temporary payment, she kept his signet ring, his cord, and his staff. And at that time, those things were like having someone's driver's license. And she kept them until he could provide her with the proper payment. Now, Judah heard that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, was pregnant through immorality, and he wanted her burned. But he was overcome with guilt when she pulled out the identifying items to show that he was the father. He recognized not only the sins of his sons, but the reality of his own failings in withholding Shelah from her, and he confessed it publicly to vindicate Tamar. She gave birth to twin boys. The amazing thing is that even though this story is so broken and so saturated with sin on all fronts, Tamar's name appears in the genealogy of Jesus. God used this sin-ridden family, this broken story, to bring about the promised offspring through the line of Tamar. What grace. Now the plot line returns to Joseph, who has been sold and taken to Egypt. And the person who bought him was named Potiphar, and he was an important guy because he was an officer of Pharaoh. The text says that the Lord was with Joseph. He is working, even in this crazy situation, for good. God caused everything Joseph did for Potiphar to be successful, and he ended up making Joseph the head over his entire household. Now, Joseph was a good-looking guy, and Potiphar's wife took notice. And day after day, she tried to seduce Joseph and get him to sleep with her. But Joseph, wisely, kept her at a distance. But one day, Potiphar's wife got him alone and grabs his clothes and says, "Lie with me." And Joseph runs away so quickly that he leaves his clothing in Potiphar's hand. And Potiphar is so angry that she lies and says that Joseph tried to sexually assault her, but ran away when she screamed. And so Joseph ends up in jail. But the amazing thing is, God was working even in this terrible situation. It says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." God's steadfast love is his covenant faithfulness, his mercy, his grace, his kindness. And God's steadfast love never fails, and it never comes to an end. If there is a theme in these 3 chapters, it is that God uses sinful people and terrible situations to bring about his good purposes. God redeems our sin and our brokenness and our pain in Jesus Christ. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." This is the reality for all who love God, for all who have been saved by Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to talking about Genesis 40 through 42 tomorrow.